Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with Aubrey Allegretti and Sebastian Payne. Welcome to both of you. With us from now until just before midnight. Front pages, though, let's kick off with those. The Metro says that the Prime Minister read the Riot Act to the Met Commissioner at their meeting today before confirming that Saturday's pro-Palestinian march in London would be allowed to go ahead. Well, the Daily Mail says Mr Sunak told Commissioner Mark Rowley, who allowed the march, "On your head be it." The Times reports that Home Secretary Suella Braverman has accused the Met Police of playing favourites by refusing to ban the march. The Eye says that comments by the Home Secretary have led some Conservatives to accuse her of fuelling anger among the UK far right. The Sun says fears of possible violence have scared poppy sellers away ahead of Remembrance Sunday. Meanwhile, The Guardian says Keir Starmer is fighting to keep control of the Labour Party over his stance on the conflict itself by refusing to call for a ceasefire. The Daily Mirror speaks to the mum of the latest young victim of knife crime on our streets, Alfie Lewis, as she asks why her son had to die. The Financial Times leads with details of efforts to rescue Japanese investment group WeWork before it filed for bankruptcy in the US this week. And finally, the Daily Star tells us that evidence of Bigfoot or a Yeti, call it what you like, it says here, has been found in woodland in Wales. A size 23 footprint, which looks like a bit of wood removed to me. But anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So welcome to both of you. Goodness me, it's March. It's the fallout of the Israel-Hamas war throughout the papers, is it not? Shall we kick off with the Metro? PM reads the Riot Act to the Met Chief, while at the end of the day accepting it could go ahead and actually, you know, some of these wars we are remembering were fighting to protest. That seems to be what he said, Aubrey.
Yeah, and it's interesting, really, the sort of staging of today, because you had the Prime Minister in the morning saying that he was going to hold Mark Rowley personally accountable for the sort of safety and of the demonstrations that were going to take place, then hauling him in, getting him in a car through the gates of Downing Street into Number 10, and then afterwards seeming to cool quite a lot, considerably, saying that he had been reassured by the Met Commissioner that all of the sort of precautions that should be taken had been being taken. All of it painting a sort of very difficult picture for the government, looking like they're trying to involve themselves in operational police decisions. And really, sort of, I think the fear remaining now is that what's been stoked is concerns that there could be these counter-demonstrations, that you could get people coming out trying to protect and cenotaphs. And that could be, in itself, what causes more of these sorts of flare-ups that they've been worried about.
Yes, I'm going to jump ahead, actually, because that's on the front page, isn't it, of a number of the newspapers, including The Eye. Tories accuse the Home Secretary of now fueling UK far-right anger. You know, there have been groups who'll say they come and defend the cenotaph. Clearly, nobody wants to see that happen. You know, is that a fair representation of what she's done, do you think, Sebastian?
No, I don't think I actually agree with that, because the fact is the protest is not going anywhere near the cenotaph, and Mark Rowley has made that very clear. It's in a different part of London, starting off in Marble Arch and going all the way down to the US Embassy, so it's going nowhere near that. And, of course, there may be some people who go off and try and get towards that, and that's where you could see those clashes. But I think the Met have been very clear that it won't happen. The theme running through all the front pages is very much, you know, there's been this crucial meeting you talked about, Aubrey, between the Prime Minister and the Met Police Chief, and what's come out of that meeting is the Met Police saying, look, we're going to do this, we're going to allow this to go ahead, but as the Mail put it quite brutally, on your head be it. It's kind of saying it's over to the Met now to police this fairly. And I think when people look back over the protests we've seen over the past couple of weeks since the tragic war began, you know, there's a lot of it has been very peaceful, and people have exercised their democratic right to protest, and that's something the Prime Minister highlighted today. But we have seen a lot of incidents of people inciting violence, of making people feel unsafe, and there has been a massive rise. I think it's something like a 300% rise in anti-Semitism since the war began. And so I think it's a very difficult situation, and what the Met has to make sure on Saturday, when the march goes ahead, assuming nothing changes, is that any incidents that are either inciting terrorism, inciting violence, or stirring things up from either side are dealt with very quickly in a very straightforward way. I think that's over to the police, and I think MPs should really just sort of not try and stir this even further.
Yeah, I mean, the law clearly states that the Met Police allow these marches unless there is serious risk of damage and disruption, and that standard has not been met, and that they will monitor throughout. So if they had banned the march, it would very likely have come down to judicial review, would it not, by the organisers to get it reinstated?
Absolutely. There's a lot of wrangling going on over what powers the police did have or might have. There was talk today of the government invoking some sort of law from the 1970s that would effectively allow it to say that it didn't think the Met was discharging its responsibilities to protect the public safely. The government's obviously not gone anywhere near that, but the fact that it was even being talked about was very sort of concerning. And I think to come back to the point we were talking about before, no one's got a crystal ball, no one knows what's going to happen on Saturday, and I'm sure everyone will be hoping that there will just be a very sort of peaceful demonstration. But at the heart of this, you have a serious split within the Conservative Party. The front of the eye spells this out. Tories accuse Home Secretary of fuelling UK far-right anger. And we've seen that today. There's a WhatsApp group for MPs who support the Home Secretary, and it has been ablaze today with rows between those who support and oppose Suella Braverman. There was one MP in it, Dan Poulter. He said, "My only reflection on this and other matters is that this is a very different party to the one I was elected to in 2010. Paul Holmes, who's a government PPS, so a front bencher, he said, "More and more lately, I have utter despair at coming into work and this party." So this isn't just about this issue. It's about sort of greater Conservative discontent within the party at Suella Braverman, and whether or not her position is sustainable in the long term, who knows?
Well, what does the Prime Minister think of her and the fact that she draws the flag and takes the flag, if you like? Also on the front page of the Times here, the Home Secretary suggesting that the Met is biased over the Gaza march. Suella Braverman accusing the Met Police of playing favourites with protesters in an article in today's Times. So does he want her to carry on taking the flag? Is this about focus groups that show that there's a part of the electorate to which she appeals? Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, the Conservative Party always likes to put itself forward as the party of law and order and of tough on policing. So, and I think if you look back at Home Secretaries throughout the party's last 13 years in power, they've always had people who are pretty hard line on this stuff. You think of Priti Patel or Theresa May, that, they drew lots of ire from statements and things they said, whereas in, I think, a lot of cases, they were reflecting the centre ground of what a lot of voters feel, what they want, which is a tough stance on law and order, and I think Suella Braverman sort of fits into that. And she does have a difficult job here, I think, of what she's trying to do to balance between these two things, because a lot of Conservatives, obviously, free speech is very much the priority of what they want to see and allow people to express themselves, but then you also have the line between hate speech there, and I think that's the sort of fault line that a lot of people on the centre-right have got to figure out, and I think Suella Braverman is sort of, but that's where you might see the slight difference of emphasis here. But this piece that the Home Secretary has written, I think she is right to highlight that the police need to make sure that when these incidents do happen, they are dealt with quite swiftly. If you think about what we saw at Liverpool Street last week at the station in East London, where it was completely taken over at rush hour by protesters, that was clearly disruptive to what people were doing. Why weren't the British Transport Police acting more clearly and decisively on that? That's what I sort of think has to be focused on.
But if you look at, and I saw you underlining some of the words in your new paper, she's not backing down. She's not softening her stance. In fact, some of this is even more inflammatory to some people, isn't it?
Well, I mean, exactly. She does go a lot further than she has in the past, but the specific phrase that she used that caused so much frustration, not just in the Conservative Party, but in the sort of wider public, was calling these hate marches. We've had minister after minister coming out over the last few days, not just declining to use that language, but distancing themselves from it very explicitly. I think even Prime Minister Rishi Sunak declined to say whether or not he would use that sort of language. But clearly, she has written this article for The Times on Thursday. It can't have been done, presumably, without Number 10 say-so. And so I think that's kind of the most interesting part of this, is how much is Rishi Sunak really sort of willing to let Suella Braverman carry on using the sorts of language she has been.
Indeed, she says, she compared these hate marches to sectarian rallies held in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and so on. So we'll see, as you say, the response of Downing Street to that, and whether cabinet ministers come out and support her words. In the meantime, it's not easy on the side of Sir Keir Starmer either. In an exclusive, The Guardian says it knows a number of shadow ministers who are prepared to quit in the coming days and others on registration watch. In fact, they say up to 15 shadow ministers with high numbers of Muslim constituents are being analysed for signs that they might quit.
Well, obviously, there's been quite a lot of discontent in Labour, and I think it's probably the biggest challenge Sir Keir Starmer has faced since he became Labour Party leader. That, you know, it just shows you how fragile momentum can be in politics, that it was only last month at Labour conference this was being heralded as a great triumph. And then now you've got, I think it's half of Labour backbenchers and 20% of ministers have all said they would like to see some kind of ceasefire there. And Keir Starmer has really tried to hold the line on this, but he's getting buffeted all the time. And it's obviously you've got Sadiq Khan in London, you've got Andy Burnham in Manchester, you've got Anna Sawar in Edinburgh as well, who are all saying they want to take a different approach here. But so far, he's trying to hold that line. And I think it's been an interesting question for Aubrey, who's followed the Labour Party more closely than I have in recent years, which is going to be, the question is, if more people quit over this, and if more follow Imran Hussain, who became the first minister to leave over this, does Keir Starmer change his position? Does he soften the language, or does he hold the line? Because he gave a speech at a think tank, Chatham House, last week, where he explained his position, said he wasn't going to change, but then that pressure is still growing, and I think in some ways, as the situation develops on the ground, it's not going to go away either.
And it's come as G7 foreign ministers meeting in Japan start to talk about the need for humanitarian pauses, with Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, coming out very firmly saying we do not see a reoccupation of Gaza by Israel. So whether the mood music of the international community, will, in a sense, stop Israel doing that reoccupation, which is something Netanyahu hinted at earlier this week.
I think there is a very interesting sort of interplay, because the Labour Party has come to this sort of bizarre consensus where it allowed shadow ministers to completely stray beyond the party's official line but not take any disciplinary action towards them. And it's been briefed tonight that Keir Starmer was threatening to sack this individual, Imran Hussain, if he hadn't already resigned. So there is a sort of toughening of Labour's stance. It doesn't want to appear to be weak and on the back foot. But at the same time, it knows that there are people waiting in the wings, watching and seeing how people will be dealt with. In some ways, this resignation is the sort of dam bursting. If other Labour MPs sort of felt that the position was holdable, which was that they could break with the party's official line but still keep their jobs, that is no longer tenable, is it? As soon as you have one person sort of put their head above the parapet and say, I've got to go, you then start getting asked, well, why aren't you resigning? And there's talk about, I think, the Scottish National Party tabling some sort of amendment during a vote in the King's Speech. That would potentially force Labour MPs to not just kind of comment, but vote very explicitly for or against this total ceasefire.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the chief political correspondent of The Times, Aubrey Allegretti, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to both of you. So, the COVID inquiry, we heard from the then Cabinet Secretary, Lord Sedwill, today, including the revelation that he had urged the then PM, Boris Johnson, to sack the then Health Secretary. Why did I start on this? Anyway, but still another fascinating day of testimony.
Certainly, and I mean, this is going to go on and on and on, and you sort of wonder who is going to come out well from this COVID inquiry. Today we heard from Sir Mark Sedwill, who was the Cabinet Secretary when the pandemic hit, so he was the most senior civil servant, and he sort of confessed to having joked that the Prime Minister should have sacked Matt Hancock to save lives and protect the NHS, which obviously was the sort of slogan that we all came to know and was repeated to us greatly over TV screens. I mean, there are more sort of details coming out in this which are also damaging for people who are still serving in government. Mark Sedwill is now in the House of Lords. He hasn't been near government for a few years. Simon Case was his successor. He is still the Cabinet Secretary. And there's a quote here from a text that Simon Case sent to Mark Sedwill. He said, "It is like taming wild animals. Nothing in my past experience has prepared me for this madness. The PM and the people he chooses to surround himself with are basically feral." So, on the one hand, it's very embarrassing for those who were in government at the time of the pandemic, but you still have people who are at senior levels of government who have not accounted for these incredibly incendiary comments that they made.
And you have the Chancellor, who's now the Prime Minister, of course, and takes us into the election. Will it have an impact, do you think, very quickly or not?
I think, look, a lot of this is very amusing to look and read about, and we're getting such an insight into the WhatsApps of senior politicians that when I was a journalist like Aubrey, I would have killed for this kind of stuff, because it makes for great copy. But if you put a policy-making hat on, there is a lot about this inquiry that I think, it's very interesting that Lord Sedwill said maybe Matt Hancock should have been sacked. But that's not actually about the questions about, did we get the cause right on lockdown? Was it right that we locked down fully the third time? Why didn't we have bubbles for families in the first lockdown? Why didn't we find a way to make sure funerals work well? I was reading the testimony of Ben Warner, who was a data scientist at Number 10, and he's been up in front of the inquiry. And his 81-page testimony, which people have got far better things to do than read that. But if you do, I think that person is far more interesting than any of the tittle-tattle backwards and forwards about the personalities, because it's an inquiry about how decisions were made. And clearly, there's a lot of stuff about Matt Hancock, and it'll be interesting to see when he comes up in front of the inquiry how he accounts for all this.
Yes, and the current PM and the ex-PM as well. Plenty more to come in the next part of our programme. We'll see you then. Aubrey and Sebastian, thank you.